All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Rise Zion. My name is Seth, and I hope you're all having a great Thursday. Now, today is a very special day because in Utah, it happens to be Pioneer Day. That's right, in Utah, we have an entire day commemorating the early saints who made the brave and very dangerous journey, leaving the known United States, the country that they had grown up in, and journeying into the unknown West, partially to find peace and refuge from the ravaging mobs and persecutions that they had faced, but also to fulfill their divine destiny. These faithful Latter-day Saints had been bounced around from town to town, driven from their homes by persecution time and time again. When they finally made their way to Jackson County, Missouri, many of them felt as if Zion were imminent. They felt as if God had finally provided a way, that he had finally provided a home for them where they could dwell in peace. Alas, this was not to be the case. Political, religious, and economic differences caused a great deal of contention among the existing residents in Missouri, leading to often violent and bloody conflict. The Saints were determined to defend themselves one last time and their property. In an order that violated the U.S. Constitution, Missouri Governor Lilburn Boggs issued the extermination order against the Saints on October 27th of 1838, signaling that the state government was essentially siding with the violent mobs. The Saints fled to the swampy and disease-ridden Nauvoo in 1839 and surrounding communities. The Saints were partly scattered, having failed to establish Zion in Jackson County. It was in the midst of these terrible circumstances and tribulations that the Saints experienced many mighty miracles. Joseph Smith healed hundreds who were dying of malaria and even raised the dead. Over the course of only 7 years, well, less than 7 years actually, the Saints miraculously transformed the Nauvoo wastelands into a paradise, a feat that was said to be impossible by many. But the Saints, through clever water management, drained the land and made it habitable to human beings. And it was here that some little-known revelations begin to be revealed to the Saints concerning the Lord's will for his people. Amazingly, the prophet Joseph Smith was shown by God years before it happened that the Saints would one day undertake a great migration westward into the heart of the Rocky Mountains. This great migration of the pioneers wasn't just a move of convenience to escape mob violence. It was prophesied, organized, and predestined to occur by an all-knowing and all-powerful God. In fact, it was only because of the Latter-day Saints and their miraculous water management and ingenuity that the entire western United States exists at all. Now, the journey of the Latter-day Saints to Utah commemorated on Pioneer Day was far more than just a physical migration driven by persecution. Again, it was a profound spiritual undertaking, deeply informed by prophetic visions and pronouncements, which we will be diving into today. Today, we will be discussing these incredible but little-known prophecies together, after discussing how they relate to us in these latter days. In previous episodes, we discussed the Constitution hanging by a thread. This was a prophecy in regards to the 4th of July. And it was given in July by the prophet Joseph Smith and reiterated by Brigham Young exactly on the 4th of July. And so it seems only fitting that we should discuss perhaps the first part of these revelations as well to understand our destiny as Latter-day Saints in the Rocky Mountains. Not just saints living in Utah, but everywhere throughout the world even. And these were prophecies that were delivered by Joseph Smith himself from God, not Brigham Young or later church leaders who ultimately led the church during this difficult migration. It seems to me that both of these prophecies, these groups of prophecies, let's say, go hand in hand. It's really fascinating to consider them as a two-part series. Part one, we have the prophecy of Joseph Smith giving that the Constitution would hang by a thread. That has been verified. And the second part of this prophecy is the prophecy of him relating to the saints that they would travel to the Rocky Mountains. We'll see how these two are connected together. It's really fascinating to look at. And it is from the Rocky Mountains that Zion, as well, the New Jerusalem, will finally be built and established in Jackson County, Missouri, and all of the stakes of Zion will be established throughout the world as well. We can't forget this. This is so important. Let's dive right into these amazing prophecies together. I'm sure that you'll be very fascinated by these. So the first one we have is found on August the 6th of 1842, as recorded in the History of the Church, Volume 5, page 85. 2 years before his own death, Joseph Smith wrote in his journal, "I had a conversation with a number of brethren in the shade of the building on the subject of our persecution in Missouri and the constant annoyance which had followed us since we were driven from that state. I prophesied that the saints would continue to suffer much affliction and would be driven to the Rocky Mountains. Many would apostatize, others would be put to death by our persecutors or lose their lives in consequence of exposure of disease. And some of you will live to go and assist in making settlements and build cities and see the saints become a mighty people in the midst of the Rocky Mountains." Okay, now this is a truly remarkable prophecy. Joseph offers a glimpse into the church's future, a future filled with hardship, sacrifice, and something extraordinary on the horizon. Though he speaks with the clarity of one who sees what others can't, there's a quiet but unmistakable weight in his words as he hints that he would not be among them for this incredible journey. And yet, the course he describes would shape the destiny of the church in ways few could have even imagined, leading them to a promised place where unexpected strength, faith, and fulfillment would rise from the dust of their hardships. Okay, another man who stood in that shaded gathering, under the shade of that building, left behind another powerful first-hand account, adding vivid detail to the moment. His name was Elder Anson Call. Now, one of the few who was present, and he was able to confirm what was said by Joseph Smith, and he painted a different and striking picture of the scene. It was a scorching August day. A barrel of ice water sat nearby as the men drank to cool their thirst. Then came the words that would echo throughout our history, right? He said, with the tumbler still in his hand, he, Joseph Smith, prophesied that the saints would go to the Rocky Mountains. And, said he, this water tastes much like that of the crystal streams that are running from the snow-capped mountains. I had before seen him in a vision, and now saw while he was talking, his countenance changed to white. Not the deadly white of a bloodless face, but a living, brilliant white light. He seemed absorbed in gazing at something at a great distance and said, I am gazing upon the valleys of those mountains. This was followed by a vivid description of the scenery of these mountains as I have since become acquainted with it. Pointing to Shadrach Roudney and others, he said, there are some men here who shall do a great work in that land. Pointing to me, he said, there is Anson. He shall go and shall assist in building up cities from one end of the country to the other. And you, rather expanding the idea to all those he was speaking with, shall perform as great a work as has been done by man, so that the nations of the earth shall be in astonishment. And many of them will be gathered in that land and shall assist in building cities and temples, and Israel shall be made to rejoice. It was impossible to represent in words this scene, which is still vivid in my mind, of the grandeur of Joseph's appearance, his beautiful descriptions of this land, and his wonderful prophetic utterances as they emanated from the glorious inspiration that overshadowed him. Okay, very, very fascinating account, right? Again, this is found in the History of the Church, Volume 5, pages 85 and 86. This, of course, reminded me, this is me speaking now, immediately of Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 3, which says, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Amen. And as far as I can tell, this was one of the final times that Joseph Smith would prophesy so directly about the saints migrating to the Rocky Mountains in such a public and profound setting, in such detail. But it was far from the first time that he had prophesied about it. The next prophecy we'll explore is one many of you have likely already heard, but not in its entirety. And I was absolutely shocked by this one when I discovered the full quote. It was absolutely astonishing. In fact, we recently touched on this very quote here on the channel during my state conference report with Elder Canlin on Pentecost Sunday, if you'll recall. Now, he referenced it, just a brief snippet of it, but today I'm going to show you the full context, and it's far more powerful than most people even realize. Okay, now this remarkable prophecy was preserved in the journal of none other than Wilford Woodruff. And once you hear it all together, you'll see it in a whole new light. Now, he reports about this vision. He says, on Sunday night, the prophet called us all who held the priesthood to gather into the little log schoolhouse they had there. It was a small house, perhaps 14 feet square, but it held the whole of the priesthood of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who were then in the town of Kirtland and who had gathered together to go off in Zion's camp. That was the first time I ever saw Oliver Cowdery or heard him speak, the first time I ever saw Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball and the two Pratts and Orson Hyde and many others. There were no apostles in the church then except Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. When we got together, the prophet called upon the elders of Israel with him to bear testimony of this work. Those that I have named spoke, and a good many that I have not named bore their testimonies. When they got through, the prophet said, Brethren, I have been very much edified and instructed in your testimonies here tonight, but I want to say to you before the Lord that you know no more concerning the destinies of this church and kingdom than a babe upon its mother's lap. You don't comprehend it. I was rather surprised. He said, It is only a little handful of priesthood you see here tonight, but this church will fill North and South America. It will fill the world. Amongst other things, he said, it will fill the Rocky Mountains. Okay, an expansion of that quote. Will fill the Rocky Mountains. There will be tens of thousands of Latter-day Saints who will be gathered in the Rocky Mountains, and there they will open the door for the establishing of the gospel among the Lamanites, who will receive the gospel and their endowments and the blessings of God. This people will go into the Rocky Mountains. They will there build temples to the Most High. They will raise up posterity there, and the Latter-day Saints who dwell in these mountains will stand in the flesh until the coming of the Son of Man. The Son of Man will come to them while in the Rocky Mountains. End quote. This is from a conference report on the 6th of April, 1898, 57. He also collected discourses edited by Brian H. Stewie, 5 volumes, Burbank, California, and Woodland Hills, Utah. HBS Publishing, 1987 to 92, Volume 3, page 85. Okay, wow. Okay, so we absolutely need to talk about this. Yes, Joseph spoke of the church filling the Rocky Mountains. Yes, he foresaw temples and tens of thousands of members gathered, but in his fuller account, recorded by President Woodruff, we discover something even more extraordinary. A moment when the Savior himself is prophesied to appear not only to Old Jerusalem, right, on the Mount of Olives, not only in Jackson County, Missouri at the New Jerusalem, but in the Rocky Mountains as well. And to be clear, he will appear at the temple in New Jerusalem as well. Nothing has changed with regards to that prophecy. It has been prophesied to occur in some way at the temple in New Jerusalem as a part of his second appearance of the second coming. In any case, we've discussed that at length, so I won't go into much more detail on that second appearance. But this full quote, it changes everything about how we understand the destiny of the saints in the last days, and it changes everything about the pioneers' pilgrimage. We can call it accurately now a pilgrimage to the Salt Lake Valley. It changes our understanding of our own destiny as well, for all saints all over the world, in fact, not just in Utah or in the West. It makes it absolutely clear that the Lord is probably going to be visiting many different places. It makes total sense if Zion will fill North and South America. It makes total sense that he would visit more than one place, more than one temple, right? It's also very interesting to note this interesting connection that Joseph Smith is making to the remnant of the Lamanites, partially being westward. Okay, this correlates very, very well with some of his other statements that the borders of the Lamanites were in the Great Plains regions. Now, this could be very helpful when we're trying to establish a Book of Mormon geography, for example. As many of you know, I am partial to a limited hemispheric model that comprises parts of Central America, Mexico, and the Western United States, where the Uto-Aztecan language groups are spoken by Native American people. Okay, but in any case, let's continue. Wilford Woodruff further explained, Joseph understood the intention to move west. Okay. In the pioneer journey, coming here, we had to come by faith. We knew nothing about this country, but we intended to come to the mountains. Joseph had organized a company to come here before his death. He had these things before him and understood them perfectly. The prophet's knowledge, concerning the prophet's knowledge, the prophet Joseph Smith knew what he was doing. In fact, he knew much more than he dared to tell on account of prejudice, traditions, and unbelief of the people. Brigham Young also contributes to this. He continued the idea of westward immigration being known, but he said, but he did not take credit for it. Okay, no. On one occasion, he stated that I did not devise the great scheme of the Lord's opening the way to send this people to these mountains. Joseph Smith contemplated the move for years before it took place, but he could not get here. Okay, these quotes highlight, again, the prophetic foresight of Joseph Smith. What becomes increasingly clear from these journal entries and discourses, from the Journal of Discourses as well, from early church leaders, is that the westward migration of the saints wasn't a desperate response to persecution alone. It was part of a divine plan that Joseph Smith had seen long before the wagons or handcarts ever began rolling. Okay, these accounts provide strong evidence of a deliberate, detailed vision of what was to come. And yet, very interestingly, we also learn that Joseph held back much of what he knew. Why? Because of the prejudice, the traditions and unbelief of the people. That's what we were told. So imagine carrying revelation so vast, so ahead of their time that even your closest followers couldn't yet bear to hear them. Now, according to some accounts, some of these accounts are even 14 years ahead of the actual move westward. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. The Rocky Mountains, the Rocky Mountain gathering wasn't just an inspired detour. It was part of a prophetic blueprint. Joseph saw it, he planned for it, and perhaps most remarkable of all, he saw who would one day come there specifically, right? However, again, it's one thing to prophesy in broad strokes. It's quite another thing entirely to sketch the future with chalk and maps, literally, okay? Now, this was something also that I discovered that I did not know about. This is fascinating. So Joseph Smith didn't just see the saints in the Rocky Mountains, he also charted the course, literally. Multiple firsthand accounts reveal that Joseph physically drew out the westward route that the saints would take, pointing to the very location where they would one day settle. He did this not just as a metaphor, but on the floor of the Masonic Hall in Nauvoo, using a piece of chalk to trace the journey westward into the Great Basin. Okay, this is very, very fascinating because actually, as I read this, something came to my mind. And it's actually a dream that was recounted by Kwaku El. I don't know if many of you guys have heard of him or not, but Kwaku El is a personality who appears on Word Radio every once in a while. But he recounted a dream that he saw Joseph Smith drawing charts of some kind on the floor in some sort of a hall. And what came to my mind was that as I was reading it. So maybe there's something to that. I don't know. If somebody knows Kwaku, just maybe point him to this resource. It could be very interesting to see what he thinks about it. But in any case, another account, George H. Goddard witnessed this. He witnessed this drawing. Joseph Smith had even drawn out the route which the saints would follow as they moved to the west. Left on record the statement that he was present in the Masonic Hall in Nauvoo when Joseph Smith mapped out the floor with a piece of chalk, the Great Basin of Western America, indicating the course they would follow across the continent. Okay, that source is McGavin E. Cecil, Nauvoo the Beautiful, Salt Lake City, Stevens and Wallace, published in 1946, page 127. Okay, so did Hopkins, Pindar, and Mosiah Hancock. Okay, these are two other accounts. Hopkins, C. Pindar, reported that Joseph Smith, just before he was killed, made a sketch of the future home of the saints in the Rocky Mountains and their route or road to that country as he had seen it in vision, a map or drawing of it. A copy of this map was either made by the prophet or by Levi W. Hancock, and other copies then made from it. Brigham Young kept one copy, and one was carried by the Mormon battalion, by which they knew where to find the church after they had settled in the Salt Lake Valley. Okay. Very fascinating that that map would be used to coordinate with the military that wouldn't have visited visited the Salt Lake City Valley yet, but that they could use that map to go after they had done, doing what they needed to do. Very fascinating. This source was taken from the diary of Oliver B. Huntington, volume 2, page 425, and it's just an account of that, and it's actually kind of hard to find. It's found in the BYU Collections Library. It's hard to find, but I did manage to find it. Now, Joseph reportedly also visited Mosiah Hancock, as we mentioned before. Visited his home shortly before leaving for Carthage. Sorry. He said, "The prophet came to our home and stopped in our carpenter shop and stood by the turning lathe. I went and got my map for him. Now, he said, I will show you the travels of this people. He then showed our travels through Iowa and said, here you will make a place for the winter, and here you will travel west until you come to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. You will build cities to the north and to the south and to the east and to the west. You will then become a great and wealthy people in that land." This is the life story of Mosiah Lyman Hancock, page 28. Okay, and this wasn't just an inspiring story passed around later. Brigham Young used one of these very sketches. One copy of Joseph's map even traveled with the Mormon battalion, as I mentioned, guiding them to where the saints would eventually gather. So when Brigham Young stood in the Salt Lake Valley and declared, "This is the place," okay, he was not speaking completely in a vacuum. This is fascinating to me. Yes, he had his own powerful spiritual confirmation, right? But Joseph Smith had already lit the path with prophetic precision. Brigham Young explained, "When the pioneers left the confines of civilization, we were not seeking a country on the Pacific, neither a country to the north or south. We were seeking a country which had been pointed out by the prophet Joseph Smith in the great North American continent." Found in Journal of Discourses, book 16, page 207. Now, we often revere Brigham Young's leadership in bringing the saints west, and rightly so. But behind that leadership was the scaffolding already in place of Joseph Smith's vision, laid down years before the saints ever left Nauvoo. And that leads us to another more well-known quote that many of you that it may sound familiar to many of you, but which has a different connotation. Okay? It says very fascinating as well. Now, this quote is often associated with Joseph Smith speaking it, and he's speaking of Zion or the visions associated with Zion in the past, okay? It was quoted recently, actually, by Elder Bednar in his talk, Things as They Really Are 2.0, and he was hinting at some of the greatest manifestations of God's power that would come through perhaps technological advancements of our age. He spoke about ancient and modern prophets seeing our day and firing with holy anticipations, right? Something to that effect. Okay, but this quote that we're going to read now is from John Taylor himself. And it's a modified quote that he's obviously taken from Joseph Smith, but he's changed the context entirely. Okay, John Taylor wrote, "Many a time have I listened to the voice of our beloved prophet while in council dwell on this subject, the removal of the saints to the Rocky Mountains. With delight, his eyes sparkling with animation and his soul filled with the inspiration of the Spirit of the living God. It was a theme that caused the bosom of all who were privileged to listen to thrill with delight. Intimately connected with this were themes upon which prophets, patriarchs, priests, and kings dwelt with pleasure and delight. Of them they prophesied, sung, wrote, spoke, and desired to see, but died without the sight. My spirit glows with sacred fire while I reflect upon these scenes, and I say, O Lord, hasten the day." Okay, very fascinating, right? So this makes it clear that we are living in Zion right now and are fulfilling these prophecies, okay, by Elder Bednar's reiteration of these things, that the greatest manifestations of the Lord's power, quoting President Nelson in his talk, relate to this day. The day that we're living in right now is that day. Okay, it's just absolutely fascinating to read these things. Okay, now again, this leads us to another topic that I thought of, which I think that we should touch on just briefly. It leads me to Elder Bednar's other talk that he gave, Beware of Pride, in General Conference. Right now, despite his visions of prosperity as well, Brigham Young expressed a profound and reoccurring concern about the saints' spiritual well-being in the face of material success. Okay, he articulated again and again his worst fear as the people getting rich in this country, forgetting God and his people, wax fat and kick themselves out of the church and go to hell, he said. He believed the saints would successfully stand up to the mobs, to robbing, poverty, and all manner of persecution, but he warned, my greater fear for them is that they cannot stand wealth, and yet they have to be tried with riches, for they will become the richest people on the earth. Okay? Very fascinating. And in many regards, this is happening today, but it has yet to be fulfilled even more, I believe, which is why we were warned about it by Elder Bednar. Okay? He's warning us again of the dangers of pride associated with great wealth, and I thought that it was worth touching on briefly. I believe that this might be the next phase of this greatest manifestations of the Lord's power, right? Now, again, just as a reminder, money and wealth have two sides. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, right? We have to remember God at all times. We have to remember our covenants of consecration, that everything that we own is the Lord's. That has been a very powerful theme that has been brought up again and again by our church leaders. And I just think it ties in so well with these prophecies of Joseph Smith. It's like he's seeing our day, right? It's like Brigham Young is seeing our day. And Joseph Smith was active in this dispensation in bringing about all of these things. Moving to Utah, building up the church, building up the temples, building up everything that is Zion, building the stakes of Zion. Interestingly, as I mentioned before, all of these prophecies also relate directly back to the prophecy of the Constitution hanging by a thread. Okay, and I'll show you how, which we've discussed in previous episodes. This prophecy was spoken at a 4th of July celebration in 1854 in the Salt Lake Tabernacle by Brigham Young, who attributed it to Joseph Smith, saying, will the Constitution be destroyed? No, it will be held inviolate by this people, referring to the saints in the Rocky Mountains. And as Joseph Smith said, the time will come when the destiny of the nation will hang upon a single thread. At that critical juncture, this people will step forth and save it from the threatened destruction. It will be so. Okay? This prophecy is very, very complicated, actually, because the part about the Constitution hanging by a thread has been verified by church leaders like Brigham Young on this July 4th, but other statements from second-hand sources are less reliable. All of them seem to differ from one another, and we don't have a solid first-hand account from Joseph Smith himself, unfortunately. Many people attribute Joseph Smith's Constitution prophecy with the white horse prophecy, for example, which the church has firmly disavowed. While it is true that the white horse prophecy uses parts of the quotes from Joseph Smith and even refers to the saints in the Rocky Mountains, the author of the white horse prophecy likely embellished or just simply misremembered things that Joseph Smith never predicted or said regarding different colored horses. I think that's important to point out. Fortunately, we do have other secondhand accounts that we can compare and contrast to come up with a more accurate view of what Joseph Smith might have actually said. Okay, now the first known record of the prophecy that we have dates to July 19th of 1840 in Nauvoo, when the prophet Joseph Smith taught, even this nation will be on the very verge of crumbling to pieces and tumbling to the ground. And when the Constitution is upon the brink of ruin, this people will be the staff upon which this nation shall lean, and they shall bear the Constitution away from the very verge of destruction. Then shall the Lord say, go tell all my servants who are the strength of mine house, mine young men and middle-aged, and come to the Lord, and come to the land of my vineyard, and fight the battle of the Lord. Then the kings and queens shall come, then the rulers of the earth shall come, then shall all saints come, yea, the foreign saints shall come to fight for the land of my vineyard, for in this thing shall be their safety, and they shall have no power to choose, but will come as a man fleeth from sudden destruction. This was recorded by Martha Jane Knowlton Correa, Church Historian's Office, Salt Lake City. If you want to look this up, it's from the Joseph Smith Papers, LDS Church Historical Archives, Box 1, March 10th, 1844. Also see D. Michael Stewart, I Have a Question, in Zion, June 1976, page 64 and 65. Okay, Very good. Okay, this is very, very interesting. This is probably the most reliable account that we have of this prophecy. But note how in this record they mention the scriptures associated with the redemption of Zion from Doctrine and Covenants. Okay, right? The vineyard, the redemption of Zion, the young men and the middle aged, right? We've talked about that a lot, actually, very recently on this channel. Now, Eliza R. Snow also reflected on the prophet's words, saying, I heard the prophet say, the time will come when the government of these United States will be so nearly overthrown through its corruption that the Constitution will hang, as it were, by a single hair, and the Latter-day Saints will step forward to its rescue and save it. And yes, Mosiah Hancock stated what he believes he remembers as well of the prophet's statements. The prophet Joseph Smith is purported to have prophesied, quote, this is Mosiah Hancock, not Joseph Smith, the United States will spend her strength and means warring in foreign lands until other nations will say, let us divide up the lands of the United States. Then the people of the U.S. will unite and swear by the blood of their forefathers that the land shall not be divided. Then the country will go to war, and they will fight until one half of the U.S. Army will give up, and the rest will continue to struggle. They will keep on until they are very ragged and discouraged and almost ready to give up, when the boys from the mountains will rush forth in time to save the American army from defeat and ruin. And they will say, brethren, we are glad you have come. Give us men henceforth who can talk with God. Then you will have friends, but you will save the country when its liberty hangs by a hair, as it were. Okay, very interesting, right? This one's substantially different from the other ones, but it does mention hanging by a thread, hanging by a hair, and the liberties of the people being preserved by some means of, the boys from the mountains, as he's saying. Now, from these quotes, we might surmise more about the ultimate destiny of the saints in the Rocky Mountains, and also even about the redemption of Zion itself. Interestingly, while I think that Mosiah's account is likely embellished and misremembered, this does correlate with the redemption of Zion scriptures and the idea of the Constitution hanging by a thread. But the saints coming forth from the mountains to rescue both the Constitution and perhaps even Zion itself. Anyway, again, the accuracy of these statements are in question, but it is clear that Joseph Smith did make some kind of prophecy with regards to the Constitution hanging by a thread. But in any case, it's so fascinating to consider these prophecies as related and helping to ultimately fulfill the objectives of God, which is the redemption of Zion and gathering scattered Israel. To reiterate again, the westward migration of the saints was not a desperate escape. It was a divine unfolding of prophecy. Long before wagons rolled across the plains or tents dotted the valley, Joseph Smith had seen it. He literally sketched maps of it. He had prophesied and declared it. And though he never lived to see the mountains himself, his prophetic fingerprints were on every step of this journey, from the chalk lines on the Nauvoo Masonic Lodge floor to the bold declarations that he made that this is the place. Okay. Well, that Brigham Young made, this is the place. We see a remarkable continuity between vision and fulfillment. The saints didn't just walk into the wilderness blind. They walked into prophecy and into their destiny. And we, as their spiritual descendants, now live in the legacy of those revelations. So the next time you see the Salt Lake Valley or any of the thriving stakes and temples across the Intermountain West, and all around the world for that matter, the temples that are now dotting the entire globe, remember, they're not just mountains of perseverance. They are monuments of they're not just the monuments of perseverance. They are the monuments of prophecy and the fulfillment of actual prophecy. Okay? And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Now, before you go, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Our goal is to reach 40,000 subscribers in 2 months to spread these important messages to as many people as possible on the YouTube algorithm. If you'd like, please also consider becoming a member of the channel to help our channel to keep growing, to help support our volunteers who have so diligently been working behind the scenes to make this channel a success. When you become a member, you are rewarded with some cool perks, including custom emojis and custom name badges that I designed myself. And also, we will be doing a raffle for members only. Every time I finish a painting, we'll be doing a raffle and giving out a free poster-sized print of my artwork. So make sure to check out our live streams every Monday through Thursday evening. And also, we have live now t-shirt pre-orders. So if you'd like to purchase a t-shirt and support the channel in that way, make sure to check out our website at risezion.org. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, bye.